At my sister's wedding, she mocked me in her speech. My sister is a single mother, unwanted by anyone. The room laughed. My mom added, she's a used product. Then the groom stood up and grabbed the mic. The room froze. I never thought the worst moment of my life would arrive wearing a bow tie and carrying a glass of sparkling cider. There I was, sitting at table 11, the one tucked behind a pillar near the kitchen corridor, close enough to smell the catering trays and far enough from the main floor that I might as well have been invisible. Which, I realized, was probably the point. I was wearing a navy dress I'd found on clearance 3 weeks before the wedding, ironed twice, because the second time I found a crease I'd missed, and paired with the only heels I owned that didn't pinch after the first hour. My daughter, Rosie, sat next to me in a dress I'd sewn myself from a pattern I found online, white with small yellow flowers, because she'd asked for something that looked like sunshine. She was 7. She was the reason I was there at all. Rosie had spent the whole drive telling me she was going to memorize every detail of the wedding so she could describe it to her stuffed rabbit, Gerald, when we got home. Gerald, she had decided, was too nervous around crowds. I told her that was very thoughtful of her. She beamed the whole way there. My younger brother, Felix, was the one getting married. Felix, who had always been the family's pride, the son who graduated without stumbling, who never caused a scene, who landed a corporate job before our mother had even finished bragging about his internship. He was marrying a woman named Cassandra who had a laugh like a bell and a smile that looked professionally installed. They made sense together, the two of them, matching in the way that people who have always been chosen tend to match. I was the older sibling who had never quite fit the frame. My name is Nora. I'm 36, a single mother, and I've been quietly classified as the family's cautionary tale for the better part of a decade. I live in a small house on the outskirts of a town that most people drive through without stopping, in a place where the winters are long and the summers feel borrowed. I work as a seamstress and alterations specialist out of a small shop 3 days a week, and on the other days, I freelance from home while Rosie is at school, hemming bridal gowns and bridesmaid dresses for women whose weddings I'll never be invited to celebrate. There is a particular kind of irony in that which I try not to examine too closely. Rosie's father left when she was 11 months old. Not dramatically, no fight, no final door slam. He just gradually became less present until one morning I realized I hadn't heard from him in 3 weeks, and when I called, the number had been disconnected. I filed the paperwork alone. I moved to a smaller apartment alone. I learned to change a car tire, unclog a drain, and explain the concept of a father's absence to a curious 4-year-old using the gentlest words I could find, all alone. My mother, Diane, was not particularly sympathetic. She has a specific way of offering comfort that feels more like inventory, cataloging your failures before reminding you that you still technically exist. When Rosie's father left, she told me I should have seen it coming. When I missed Felix's college graduation because Rosie had a fever of 104, she told our extended family I simply hadn't made the effort. I had made my peace with being misread. What I hadn't prepared for was being used as the evening's entertainment. The venue was the kind of place that makes you feel underdressed the moment you step inside. Vaulted ceilings, ivory draping, flowers in shades of blush and cream, arranged in tall glass vases that probably cost more than my monthly grocery bill. A string quartet was playing something classical near the entrance, and the guests moved through the space with the particular ease of people who are used to belonging in beautiful rooms. I held Rosie's hand tightly. She looked up at the ceiling and whispered, "Mama, it looks like a cloud." "It does," I said. "Gerald would have loved it." "Gerald would have been overwhelmed," I told her. "He made the right call." She giggled and squeezed my hand, and for a moment, just that moment, I felt completely fine. Felix found me near the entrance. He hugged me briefly, the kind of hug that communicates obligation rather than warmth, and crouched down to tell Rosie she looked pretty. She told him about Gerald. He nodded politely in the way adults do when they don't know how to talk to children. Then his eyes moved past us both, drawn by someone waving from across the room, and he was gone. Cassandra didn't come to greet me at all. My mother walked past me twice before acknowledging my presence. The second time, she stopped, looked me up and down in the particular way she has that makes you feel like a garment being assessed for flaws, and said, "You found something to wear." Then she moved on to embrace a woman I didn't recognize, exclaiming how wonderful it was to see her. I found table 11, noted the proximity to the kitchen, and decided to be grateful we at least had a clear view of the dance floor. Rosie immediately wanted to know if there would be cake. I told her I hoped so. She said Gerald had asked her to describe the frosting in detail. I told her to take mental photographs. We ate our salads. I helped Rosie navigate the bread basket. I watched the room from our pillar-adjacent corner and tried very hard not to feel what I was feeling, which was the specific sensation of being a stranger at a celebration built from a life I'd been quietly edited out of. Then the speeches began. Cassandra's maid of honor went first. She was polished, funny in a rehearsed way, and managed to make the room laugh 3 times in 4 minutes, which is honestly impressive. She sat down to generous applause. Then the best man gave a speech that was mostly anecdotes about a camping trip Felix had taken 7 years ago, during which apparently several mildly comedic things had occurred. Light laughter, comfortable warmth, the usual. Then my mother stood up. I hadn't known she was planning to speak. No one had mentioned it to me. But there she was, standing with a champagne flute and a microphone that someone had passed to her like this had been arranged in advance. Diane is a woman who has always understood the power of an audience. She was beautiful once, and she knows it, and she carries the memory of it like armor. Even now, at 62, she commands a room in a way that makes you understand why people have always given her what she wanted. She began warmly. She spoke about Felix, how proud she was, how she had always known he would find someone extraordinary, how Cassandra had brought such light into the family. The room was rapt. She is genuinely gifted at this, at performing love so convincingly that you almost forget it has conditions. Then she said, "Of course, I also want to acknowledge my daughter, Nora, who made the trip tonight." I looked up. Rosie looked at me with excitement and whispered, "She's talking about you, Mama." I thought maybe this is it. Maybe this is the moment she sees me in front of people, says something true, something kind. Maybe this is what reconciliation looks like in our family, not a conversation but a public acknowledgement, brief and imperfect but real. I raised my glass slightly, a reflex of hope. My mother smiled out at the crowd, the way she does when she's about to deliver a line she's proud of. Nora has always done things her own way. Single mother, independent, strong, in the sense that no one's been able to pin her down, or perhaps the other way around. She laughed at her own joke. Either way, she's still standing, which is really the most any of us can say for her. Light, uncomfortable laughter from the crowd. My hand stilled on my glass. Cassandra's mother, seated 2 tables away, turned toward me with an expression I couldn't read. The maid of honor looked at her phone. A distant cousin of Felix's, a man I'd met once at a family reunion, pressed his lips together and looked at the centerpiece. But my mother wasn't finished. She tilted her head, the way she does when she's warming up, and added, "I mean in all seriousness. She showed up tonight, didn't she? That's more than most people expected. Single mother, no partner, a child to drag along, and here she is, brave in her own particular way." She smiled like she was complimenting me. She was not complimenting me. Some women just aren't built for the kind of love that stays, but Nora makes it work, we don't ask how. The room laughed. Not everyone, maybe a third of the guests, but enough. The particular quality of that laughter, knowing, dismissive, comfortable in its cruelty because it had been wrapped in a smile, hit me somewhere below the sternum. And then Cassandra's aunt, a heavy-set woman in a yellow fascinator whom I had never met in my life, leaned toward her table mates and said, loudly enough to carry, "Bless her heart. A second-hand life and she's still dressing it up." More laughter, sharper. I did not move. I felt Rosie's small hand find my arm. She tugged gently. "Mama," she whispered, "why did Grandma say that? What did it mean?" I opened my mouth. Nothing came out. I looked around the room. I was looking for a face that might offer me something, acknowledgement, discomfort, anything that signaled that what had just happened was not acceptable. My Uncle Paul was studying his fork. My cousin Brianna was whispering to her husband with a small, tight smile. The woman at the table beside ours, someone from Cassandra's side, someone I'd never met, caught my eye for half a second, then looked away. No one spoke. My grandfather, Raymond, who has called me his clever girl since I was 4 years old and who taught me how to play chess on a battered wooden board he kept in his study, was sitting 3 tables away. He was looking at his napkin, folding and unfolding it with careful, deliberate hands. I had never felt more alone in a room full of people. But it was Rosie's face that broke me open. She was 7 years old and she was looking at me with her brow furrowed, trying to understand why the room was laughing, why her grandmother had said something that felt wrong in a way she couldn't yet articulate, why her mother, who read to her every night and made her school lunches in the shapes of animals and held her when the thunder came, was sitting very still and very pale in a room full of people who were supposed to be family. "Mama," she said again, quiet, uncertain. That was it, that was the thing I couldn't swallow. Not my mother's words, not the stranger in the yellow fascinator, not the laughter, not the napkins, not the forks. It was the look on my daughter's face, the beginning of understanding that the world could be cruel, and that cruelty could come from people who were supposed to love you. I set my glass down, my hands were not entirely steady. I pushed back my chair. I wasn't going to make a speech. I wasn't going to say anything eloquent or devastating or memorable. I was going to take my daughter's hand and walk out of this room with whatever dignity I had left, and I was going to cry in the car where no one could see me, and then I was going to drive home and put Rosie to bed and sit in the kitchen for a long time in the dark. That was the plan. I stood. And then, from the head table, I heard a chair scrape back. The sound cut through the room like something breaking. Marcus, Felix's groom, the man I had met exactly 4 times, a quiet architect from Portland who wore glasses and had the deliberate manner of someone who chooses words carefully, stood up. He was not a large man. He was not loud. He didn't have the particular energy of someone about to make a scene. He had the energy, instead, of someone who had made a decision and was very calm about it. He reached over and took the microphone from the stand on the head table. The room went still in the way that rooms go still when something unscripted is happening, and no one knows yet whether it will be wonderful or terrible. My mother sat down. Marcus didn't look at Felix. He didn't look at my mother. He didn't scan the crowd for allies or assess the room for reaction. He looked directly at me, standing by table 11 with my hand resting on the back of my chair and my daughter looking up at me with uncertain eyes. His expression was not angry, exactly. It was something older than anger. It was the look of a person who has decided that staying quiet is no longer something they're willing to do. "I'm sorry," he said into the microphone, and his voice was steady and clear and carried easily to every corner of the room. "I need to say something." Felix said his name, low, cautioning. Marcus glanced at him briefly, the way you glance at someone you love when you're about to do something they might not like, but that you have to do anyway. Then he looked back at the room. "I want to be honest with you," he said, "because I think this room deserves honesty more than it deserves comfort right now." No one moved. I've spent the last year planning a wedding with my partner and his family. I've sat through dinners and phone calls and conversations about seating charts and centerpieces, and in all of that time, I've heard Nora mention the way you mention a problem. A complication. Something the family has learned to manage. A woman at a nearby table pressed her hand to her mouth. And tonight, I watched a mother stand up with a microphone and use her daughter as a punchline at her son's wedding. I watched a room full of people laugh. And I watched a 7-year-old girl look at her mother and try to understand what had just happened. He paused, not for effect. I don't think Marcus was performing. I think he simply needed a breath. Nora didn't come here to be ridiculed. She came here because this is her brother's wedding. She dressed her daughter in a dress she made with her own hands. She sat at table 11, and yes, I noticed where she was seated, and she smiled, and she clapped, and she tried. I was not going to cry. I had decided I was not going to cry in this room. I was losing that particular battle. Marcus stepped out from behind the head table. He walked toward the center of the room slowly, not rushing, the microphone loose in his hand. He stopped near the midpoint of the floor, equidistant from the head table and from where I stood. "I've met Nora 4 times," he said. 4 times, and in those 4 times I've watched her navigate this family with a grace that I honestly don't know if I could manage. She doesn't ask for recognition. She doesn't demand space. She just shows up, quietly and completely, and does what needs to be done. Tonight, what needed to be done was showing her daughter that family means something. He turned briefly toward my mother, not unkindly, but with the directness of someone who has stopped pretending. What was said at this microphone tonight wasn't humor. It wasn't roasting, it wasn't warmth dressed as teasing, it wasn't tradition. It was cruelty given a champagne glass and an audience. And I'm not willing to build a life inside a family that considers that acceptable, that laughs at it, that contributes to it. A sound rippled through the room. Not laughter. Something more like the collective exhale of people who have been holding something uncomfortable for a long time and are only now allowing themselves to feel it. "Nora," he said, and he looked at me again. "I want you to know that I see what this cost you tonight. I see what it cost you to sit there and say nothing and protect your daughter from your own pain. That's not weakness. That is the specific strength that this room just laughed at, and I need everyone in here to understand what that means." He turned to Rosie. He crouched down slightly, because Rosie is small and he has the instinct of someone who knows to meet children at their level. "Your mom," he said, "is one of the bravest people in this room. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise." Rosie looked at him for a long moment, then she looked at me, then she took my hand. Marcus straightened. He stood for a moment, looking at the crowd, at the uncomfortable faces, the averted eyes, the guests who had laughed and were now very carefully not laughing. "I came here today to marry the man I love," he said quietly. "And I still want that. I still want that more than I can say. But I also need Felix to know, and I need everyone in this room to know, that the life I want to build is one where this doesn't happen, where people are not sacrificed for the comfort of the room." He set the microphone down on the nearest table with a quiet click that sounded, in that silence, enormous. Then he walked out. The room did not recover. There is a particular kind of silence that follows something true being said in a place that has been running on performance, and that silence is not comfortable. It has texture. It presses against the chest. It makes people look at their hands. Felix stood at the head table for a long moment. His face was difficult to read, a composition of shock and something that might have been shame, or might have been love, or might have been both at once. Then he followed Marcus out the door. The string quartet, who had been frozen near the far wall for the past 4 minutes, looked at each other uncertainly. One of them raised her bow and then lowered it again. My mother stood. Her chair made an aggressive sound against the floor. "Well," she said, in the voice she uses when she's trying to reassert control over a situation that has escaped her, "that was completely unnecessary." But no one agreed with her, not audibly. The guests who had laughed earlier were staring at their tablecloths. The woman in the yellow fascinator was looking at the exit. Cassandra's mother, a woman I'd only spoken to once, briefly, near the appetizer table, looked across the room at me with an expression that was quietly, unmistakably apologetic. I didn't say anything to my mother. I looked down at Rosie. "You ready?" I asked her. She considered this with the seriousness she brings to important questions. "Should we say goodbye to anyone?" I thought about that. "Let's say goodbye to Grandpa Raymond," I said. We walked across the room. People moved aside without being asked. Conversations that had been starting died back down. I felt eyes following me, but differently than before, not the eyes of an audience watching a punchline, but the eyes of people recalibrating. Raymond was still at his table. He had not moved during Marcus's speech. He had not looked up. But when I reached him and touched his shoulder lightly, he looked up at me with eyes that were red-rimmed and said, "Nora," in a voice that was barely there. "It's okay, Grandpa," I said. "It's not," he said. "It hasn't been for a long time. I should have said something years ago." He paused, pressing his lips together. "I'm sorry that I didn't." I bent down and kissed his cheek. He smelled like the same aftershave he'd worn my entire life. "I love you," I told him. "That doesn't change." He nodded and couldn't seem to find anything else to say, and I understood that. I'd spent years not being able to find the words either. Rosie patted his hand with the solemn generosity of a 7-year-old who understands that something sad has happened without knowing all of its edges. "It was a very nice wedding," she told him, with great sincerity. "Gerald would have liked the flowers." He looked at her with something in his face that might have been the beginning of a smile. We walked out into the night. The air outside was cool and sharp and smelled like September. The kind of night where you can hear everything clearly, the distant sound of traffic, the crunch of gravel underfoot, the particular quality of quiet that follows a long, loud thing. I stood by my car for a moment, not getting in, just breathing. Rosie stood beside me, her hand in mine, looking up at the sky. The parking lot was lit with those tall amber lights that make everything look slightly like an old photograph. "Mama," she said. "Yeah, baby. Marcus is nice." "He is," I agreed. "Is he going to be okay?" "I thought about that. I think so," I said. "I think he said what he needed to say." She was quiet for a moment. Gerald would like him, she decided. Gerald is a good judge of character. Gerald sounds like a very perceptive rabbit. "He is," she said with complete conviction. "He's very emotionally intelligent." I laughed. It surprised me, the realness of it, the way it moved through my chest and out into the night air. I laughed and Rosie looked up at me and then laughed too, even though she wasn't entirely sure what was funny, because she has always had the gift of laughing alongside the people she loves. We got in the car. I sat for a moment before starting the engine, my hands in my lap, looking at the lit windows of the venue through the windshield. Shadows moved behind the glass. Somewhere in there, people were figuring out what happened next. Somewhere in there, my mother was probably constructing the version of tonight's events that she could live with. I found I didn't need to know how that story came out. I started the car. The drive home was quiet. Rosie fell asleep 20 minutes in, her cheek pressed against the window, her hands folded in her lap, the small yellow flowers on her dress catching the light from passing street lamps. I drove and I breathed, and I let the evening settle into me without trying to sort it just yet. I put Rosie to bed without waking her fully. She stirred enough to pull Gerald from beside the pillow and tuck him under her chin, and then she was deeply asleep again, her breathing slow and even. I sat in the kitchen for a long time. Not crying, not quite, something more like processing. The way you sit with something enormous and let it take up space for a while before you try to put it somewhere manageable. I thought about the laughter, the way it had moved through the room in waves. The way my mother's face had looked when she delivered the line, pleased, like someone who has landed a joke they'd been holding for a while. I thought about Rosie's expression, that small, furrowed brow, the beginning of understanding. I thought about Marcus standing up, the sound of the chair, the particular quality of his voice, not furious, not dramatic, just steady and true, the way something sounds when the person saying it means every word. I thought about my grandfather's face, and what it costs a person to stay silent for decades, and what it means to finally say I'm sorry when the moment is long past. I thought about the woman in the yellow fascinator, and how some cruelty is casual, offered without thought, because some people have never had to wonder how the room sees them. And I thought about Rosie, asleep in the next room with Gerald tucked under her chin, who had watched all of it and would carry some version of it forward. Who had heard a man she barely knew tell a room full of strangers that her mother was brave. Who had patted an old man's hand without being asked, because she is, at 7 years old, more generous than most adults I've met. I felt, underneath the exhaustion and the residue of hurt, something else, something quieter and more durable. I felt like myself. Not the family's version of me, the cautionary tale, the complicated one, the woman who couldn't make love stay. Not the woman at table 11, near the kitchen, half hidden by a pillar. Not the punchline. Just myself, Nora, 36, seamstress, mother, the woman who makes dresses for other people's weddings and sews sunshine patterns for her daughter and has been, all along, more than enough. I woke up the next morning to 17 missed calls. Cousins I hadn't spoken to in years. A woman from Cassandra's side whose number I didn't recognize. 3 calls from my mother that I set aside the way you set aside something hot when you're not ready to handle it. And a text from my cousin Brianna, the one who had whispered to her husband during the speech, that said, "Someone filmed it. Marcus's speech. It's everywhere. I opened the link she sent. The video was shaky, shot from somewhere near the back of the room on someone's phone. The sound quality wasn't perfect, but you could hear Marcus clearly. You could see him walking toward the center of the floor, calm and deliberate. You could see me, standing by my chair, one hand on the table, Rosie beside me. The comments were in the hundreds of thousands. This man is everything. I cried watching this, I genuinely cried. Every single mother just got a moment of justice. The way he talked to the little girl, I can't. Table 11, I felt that in my soul. My hands are shaking. I hope that woman knows how many people are rooting for her right now. I read for a long time. Then I put my phone face down on the kitchen table and made pancakes. Rosie appeared in the doorway while they were cooking, her hair still pressed flat on one side from sleeping, Gerald dangling from her hand, his ears slightly askew. Pancakes, she said, brightening immediately. Pancakes, I confirmed. She climbed onto her chair, settled Gerald on the table so he could observe, and watched me flip the first one with the focused attention she brings to things she considers important. Mama, she said. Emma. I told Gerald about last night. She smoothed one of his ears thoughtfully. He said you handled it with dignity. I looked at her, this small, serious, luminous person. Tell Gerald thank you, I said. He says you're welcome, she paused. He also says Marcus has good energy. Gerald is very perceptive. I know, she said, I told you. A week later, I received a message from Marcus. He had found my contact information through Felix, which meant Felix had given it to him, which meant something, though I wasn't sure yet what. The message was brief. He said he was sorry for what had happened. He said he wanted me to know it had not been a performance, that he'd meant every word. He said that he and Felix were working through things, carefully, with a lot of conversation, and that he hoped I was okay. He said I should have done more sooner. I'm sorry it took a microphone. I read it twice, then I wrote back. You don't owe me an apology. You gave me something I didn't know I needed. That matters more than you know. I paused, then added, my daughter wants you to know that Gerald approves of you. He is apparently an excellent judge of character. He responded 20 minutes later with a laughing emoji and then, please tell Gerald the feeling is mutual. I smiled at my phone in the quiet of my kitchen, with the morning light coming through the window and the sound of Rosie somewhere in the house narrating something to Gerald with great seriousness. And I felt genuinely, cleanly, without qualification, okay. My mother called 3 times that week. I let the calls go to voicemail. When I finally listened, the messages moved through a recognizable arc. The first was defensive, the second was wounded, the third was the version of apologetic that doesn't quite reach sorry, more of a grievance dressed as reconciliation. I don't understand why everyone is making such a big deal of this. I was making a joke. You've always been too sensitive. I sat with the messages for a day. Then I called her back. She answered on the second ring, already talking before I could begin. Finally, Nora, I need you to understand that what happened was blown completely out of proportion. Mom, I said. She paused. I'm not calling to argue, I said. I'm calling because I want to say one thing and I want you to hear it. A silence, fine. I'm not doing this anymore, I said. I'm not showing up to be managed or minimized or used as contrast to make other people look better. I'm not bringing Rosie into spaces where she watches me be treated as less than. I love you, that part doesn't go away. But I'm done performing gratitude for being included while being excluded. A longer silence. So what does that mean? She asked finally. Her voice was careful, slightly stunned. My mother is not accustomed to being met with calm. It means I'm choosing myself, I said. And Rosie, and I'm not going to keep explaining that choice or defending it. You know where I am when you're ready to talk differently. Then I said goodbye, and I hung up. I sat very still for a moment afterward, in the particular quiet that follows doing something difficult. Then Rosie appeared in the doorway, dragging Gerald by one ear, and asked if we could go to the park. Yes, I said and stood up. Absolutely yes. It's been 7 months. Felix and Marcus are still together. They're taking their time, no rush toward a new ceremony, no pressure. Felix sent me a message last month asking if we could have coffee. I said yes. We sat across from each other in a small cafe near his office, and it was awkward for the first 20 minutes and then slowly not. He said he was sorry. Not a big speech, not a grand gesture, just 2 words plainly, looking at his coffee cup. I told him I appreciated it. We talked about other things after that. About his work, about Rosie's insistence that Gerald is going through something and might need space. He laughed, real and surprised, the laugh I remember from when we were children. It's a beginning, small and uncertain but real. My mother and I have not spoken again. I don't know yet whether that's permanent. I've stopped needing to know the answer to that question. I've learned that some doors don't have to be slammed to be closed. Some of them just ease shut, quietly, when you finally stop holding them open out of habit. Rosie is flourishing, in the way that children flourish when they stop absorbing ambient tension they don't understand. She is reading chapter books now. She has decided Gerald needs a friend and has been lobbying for a second stuffed animal with the focused persistence of a very small union organizer. She starts every morning by telling me something interesting she learned the day before, and I have started my days this way for so long now, with her voice, her mind, her particular way of seeing, that I can't remember what mornings felt like before her. One evening, I was doing alterations at the kitchen table after she'd gone to bed, a wedding dress, which is most of what I do, and I sat back and looked at it for a moment. All those careful seams, all that work to make something beautiful and lasting. I thought about the wedding, and the room, and the speech, and the laughter. I thought about a man standing up at the wrong time and doing the right thing. I thought about how much of my life I had spent making myself smaller in rooms that should have had space for me. How I had learned to apologize for taking up space, to be grateful for the leftovers of belonging, to sit at table 11 and be thankful I'd been invited at all. I picked up the dress and kept sewing. I carry myself differently now. It's hard to explain in any single definitive way. It's not a transformation with a clean before and after. It's more like something that had been slightly compressed in me has been allowed to expand back to its natural size. I walk into rooms expecting to be seen. I don't apologize for being there. A few weeks ago, a woman came into the shop for a fitting, a bride, young and nervous, beautiful in the particular way of people who don't know they're beautiful. She kept apologizing. Sorry to take so much time, sorry about the alteration, sorry this is complicated. Every other sentence was a sorry. You don't have to keep apologizing, I told her, pinning the hem. She stopped surprised. Old habit, she said. I know, I said, I had it too. She looked at me in the mirror. How did you break it? I thought about that. Someone reminded me, I said, that my presence isn't something I owe anyone an apology for. She was quiet for a moment. Then she nodded, slowly, like she was writing it down somewhere inside herself. I know what that feels like. Last week, Rosie asked me a question while we were washing dishes. Her washing, me drying, the ordinary sacred ritual of an ordinary evening. Mama, she said, do you think the wedding was sad? I considered it honestly. Parts of it were, I said. But not all of it. Not all of it, I said, no. She handed me a plate to dry. I think the sad part made the other parts more important, she said, with the offhand profundity that 7-year-olds sometimes produce without knowing they're doing it. I looked at her. Yeah, I said, I think you're right. She nodded, satisfied, and handed me another plate. Gerald thinks so too, she said. He's very wise. He really is, I agreed. And we stood there in the kitchen, washing dishes, while the evening light came through the window and settled over everything. The plates, the counters, the small yellow dress hung on the hook by the door, and it was quiet and ordinary and completely, entirely enough. I didn't dance at my brother's wedding. I didn't toast, or laugh at the right moments, or feel the warmth of being surrounded by people who love me. I sat at table 11, by the kitchen, and I was mocked by my mother in front of a room full of people, and I sat very still and tried not to let my daughter see me break. But I walked out of that room holding her hand. And someone who barely knew me, someone who had no obligation to do anything at all, chose to stand up and say, no, not here, not in front of her child, not on my watch. That moment did not fix everything. It did not resolve my family, or heal the years of quiet damage, or undo the laughter. Real life doesn't work that way. Real grace is not a single scene. But it cracked something open. It reminded me, and maybe some of the people in that room, and maybe you, watching this now, that dignity is not given to you by the people who chose to overlook you. It was never theirs to give. It was always yours, waiting, on the other side of the moment, when you finally decide to stop asking for their permission to have it. I am Nora. I am 36. I am a seamstress, a mother, a woman who sat at table 11 and then stood up and walked out and drove home and made pancakes in the morning. I am exactly, entirely enough. If this story found you at a moment when you needed it, if you've sat at your own table 11, if you've been the punchline, if you've watched someone stand up and say what needed to be said, you are not alone in that. Please take a moment to like this video and share it with someone who needs to hear that their worth has never been determined by the people who failed to see it. Leave a comment below. Tell me, has someone ever stood up for you when you least expected it, or have you ever found the courage to stand up when it would have been easier to stay silent? And if you want more stories like this one, true, human, unflinching, subscribe to this channel and turn on notifications so you're here for what comes next. Thank you for watching. Thank you for being someone who stays until the end.